أهلا بكم. قضايا التغير المناخي والاقتصاد الأخضر والنمو الأخضر الذي يتجه إليه العالم اليوم، ومصطلح حوكمة الشركات والعديد من المصطلحات والمفاهيم اليوم نناقشها مع ضيفي السيد فيليبي كالديرون، الرئيس السابق للمكسيك والرئيس الفخري للجنة العالمية للاقتصاد والمناخ. حياكم الله إذا مجددا. Mr. President, welcome to Sharjah and glad to have you here in our show. At the beginning, let's talk about green growth as a global leader on environmental issues and an honorary chairman of the World Committee on Economics and Climate. You developed special strategies to reduce the repercussions of climate change and other strategies in the field of green growth. Tell us more about these.
Thank you. Basically, we are witnessing the disaster that it's already happening everywhere. I was talking about, for instance, the disaster in Pakistan, where more than 2,000 people died as a consequences of the terrible floods. The water covered 1/3 of the entire territory, or the droughts everywhere, much more time. For instance, in Somalia, 5 years in a row without rain, with all its implication for the poverty of the people, hunger, social unrest. So just today, as we are speaking, a terrible hurricane hitting the United States. So we can talk and going and on about the climate change is a reality.
Yes.
Climate change is a clear consequence of the human behavior because if you modify the temperature of the earth, you modify the conditions of the weather as well. And the temperature has been modified after the Industrial Revolution due to carbon emissions. However, being so evident, the signs and the events we are contemplating, the big question is why we are not taking action. And one of the possible answers, it is because we have thought that to take action on climate implies huge sacrifices. That to take action on climate, for instance, represents for governments and leaders and companies to sacrifice, for instance, economic growth or job creation or poverty alleviation. So most of the leaders up now say, no, I prefer economic growth and not be responsible with the environment. But in the Global Commissions on the Economy and Climate, which I had the honor to chair, we were able to demonstrate that that is not true. So that dilemma between economic growth or tackling climate change is a false dilemma actually. And indeed, it is possible to have economic growth and at the same time to be responsible with the environment at the same time. So we can have growth, green growth, or as we say in our report, a new climate economy, an economy in which you can create jobs, improve the quality of life of the people to get economic growth, actually better economic growth, but at the same time better climate, to reduce the carbon emission. Yes. If we are able to modify 3 big systems, I can go into details, but I just mentioned them. If we are able to modify the way in we are designing the cities of the future, in the system in which we are using the energy, and the system of the land use, either in agricultural purposes, and in particular forests, rainforests, and woods everywhere. So it is possible to have both better growth and better climate. Basically, that's the philosophy, the outcome of the research that we made in the Commission of the New Climate Economy.
No. To understand green growth, let's talk about the main role of green growth in supporting the energy sector, food security, and other economic sectors as well.
Definitely. For instance, we can have a better growth and better climate if we use the energy in a better way. And if we are able to design a fair, just transition from the current system from fossil fuels energy sources to renewable energy and a more resilient, more efficient use of energy everywhere. And technology is currently in our side. When I was president and started to explore alternatives for renewable energy, the price of electricity coming from renewables was too high. For instance, the price of 1 megawatt hour of electricity coming from solar photovoltaic cells was like 10 years ago, roughly it had a price of $400 per megawatt hour. Mm-hmm. Currently in the Emirates, there was an auction where the price was only $20. So you can imagine the reduction of the price from 400 to 20 is 90% of decrease in its costs. And actually is still decreasing because technology is evolving in a marvelous way. Yeah. That currently there have been auctions in the Middle East, in the Arab Emirates and in Saudi Arabia, in addition to the Emirates, in which the price reached $13, not was $400. So that's a tiny example in which it is clear that we can design a transition in benefit of the human being. In particular, and in agriculture, for instance, it's not the case in this region, which is very dry and with desert, but in several regions in the world, and unfortunately it's the case of my own country, Mexico, we are not using the water in the best way. But with the current technology, if we are able to apply the current technology for the forms of use the land for agricultural purposes, we can improve the productivity, we can generate much more food in the very same surface or even less, and we can have much better use of natural resources, including water, and less carbon emission. And again, it's a win-win situation, but we need to take the decisions to change, to switch now. Otherwise, it's going to be impossible to avoid a disaster of incredible consequences. For instance, if we continue in this trend in the region, despite the terrible water stress in which these countries live, the delta of the Nile will be underwater by the end of the century. The entire city of Alexandria, for instance, in Egypt, will be underwater. So this is one small consequence of climate change, and probably not the most important, which is the increase of the level of the sea.
Just one example, yes. If we talk about the present, what are the main challenges facing the world in making decisions for green growth?
But one is how to redesign the cities. For instance, and I'm talking about Mexico. Maybe it applies to other countries, but we follow a sprawling out model building the cities. No, widen and widen the cities. And those cities we design are cities designing for cars.
Yes.
So we need to rethink the cities and to design them for human beings. So it doesn't imply that we need to destroy or abandon the current cities, but at least designing the public works we need to do in the future, more in a new concept of the cities.
How is that, Mr.
More
President?
compact cities, more connected, more coordinated, more smart cities. For instance, instead of base the cities on the infrastructure based upon the use of cars, we need to redesign and put an emphasis in massive transportation system. So, and there are a lot of examples, of course, metro, but even not as much expensive as metro. For instance, bus rapid transit. And if it's possible, if you have the resources, which is the case, for instance, in old countries still, you can design an electric bus system,
yes,
able to transport people, and the cities could be more productive. Just think about a worker, citizen or not, a worker that need to take 2-3 hours a day for commuting from his house to his place of work, the jam of traffic, etc.
Yes.
If that worker, a waitress in an hotel or a nurse in a hospital, can commute in much less time, he or she will be much more productive. The city will be much productive. The economy will be better, and the environment and the emission will be much less. Or retrofitting the buildings. You can see a lot of examples in which, for instance, we are not isolating the buildings or the houses or the apartments in the right way. So you are using a lot of energy turning on the air conditioning system, right? Or we leave the room and the air conditioner still keep going and going. So we are able to isolate the roofs, the walls, the right windows, the shadows of the windows. We can keep in a much better way the temperature. We can save a lot of energy. If we decide air conditioners equipments, not the traditional one, for instance, using artificial intelligence that can have sensors for the people, for the temperature. You can program those systems from your mobile phone a lot. We can do a lot of things redesigning the cities for the future. I'm not talking a utopian thing. The point is the cities are still growing even faster. If you consider the number of people that it is estimated that is come to live in an urban or to the cities from now to the year 2030, it implies that the world needs to build one city like Sharjah every single day. One Sharjah every single day in the next 6 years. So how can we design that city? Are we going to make exactly the same model, the same design as in the past? Are we going to make the same mistakes? I think there is no point. If we are going to invest one way or another, let's say $90 trillion in the world, which is estimated in infrastructure, let's do it the right way.
Yes.
If we are going to make public works instead of more elevated pathways, let's make massive transportation system, either metro or BRT. If we are going to invest in more energy for the people, let's invest right now in renewable energy instead of a coal plant.
Yes.
And let me tell you, the Emirates and other oil countries, including Mexico, has the advantage that can get the best of the two worlds from the past world, which is oil, and without assets to finance the transition to the new world and take the lead in renewables. Because the cost of the problem of renewables, for instance, could be, it requires sometimes a very big investment upfront, but the operational cost trends to zero. If you can build a solar facility or a wind facility, it implies a lot of money, but in the long term would imply zero operational cost, right? So if you have the asset, you have the money, the financial capability, you can get the best benefit from the past, which is the oil and as an asset, and the best benefit that you can finance the transition, which not all the countries could do that. So the worst thing that you can do is to try to ignore the reality. The change is on its way, and you need to consider that as a privilege, or you are blessed as country and blessed people, that you can see the future with much more assets and capabilities than other one.
Speaking about the reality, if we talk about the present, is there any positive, let's say, effects of the current strategies in the field of environment on the economic crisis the world is facing today? And what about the future if these strategies and policies are not changed?
We are facing indeed a very difficult moment everywhere in the economic terms, yes. However, it represents at the same time an incredible opportunity to foster the transition. Let me say, well, we need to create, for instance, jobs, right, to get out of the crisis. Let's say the new jobs in energy, for instance, in the United States, are more in renewables than in traditional fossil fuels. For instance, at a global level, the number of workers in coal mining industry is roughly 4.7 million workers. Currently, the number of workers in photovoltaic solar energy in the world is more than 6 million. And if you consider the entire industry of renewables, we are talking about 13 million workers working directly. So the jobs we need to recover our economies are in the new climate economy. So any investment that the governments need to do to foster the economy could be done in the new infrastructure, in the new effort, not in the old one. If you put the right incentives, allowing, for instance, private capital for renewable energy, you withdraw the subsidies for fossil fuels, there are massive amounts of money waiting for opportunities to invest in renewable energy everywhere. It is estimated that, well, it's not estimated, it's a reality that in the last 5 years, in the electricity sector, more than 50%, more than half, has been in renewable sector, not in the traditional fossil fuel sector. And by the year 2030, 60% of the capacity of electricity will come from renewable. So the point is, the new climate economy, the green economy, is the way in which we not only can reduce the carbon emissions, but also can foster the economies in order to get out of the recession we are living in several countries.
Yeah. If we talk about the government's efforts, one of the steps is the governance. The environmental, societal, and corporate governance is a new step towards promoting sustainable development. What is the impact of applying correct governance standards on the right direction towards a green economy?
Well, it is important questions, and the term sustainability has been widening year after year. And sustainability, as you say, now is understood as a three-dimensional concept: the environmental concept, the governance concept, and the social concept. ESG is the acronym in English. And yes, we need to move ahead in the three fronts: social, environmental, governance concept. And that implies to modify the rules and the regulation for companies, for instance, to include more plurality in the board, to take decisions with more transparency, for the companies to have more social commitment in the communities they are operating, and a lot of examples. And actually, in a very important part of the world, the regulation is already pushing in that direction. A big bank in any place in London or in New York needs to follow now these ESG principles associated with sustainability. Now, I want to be completely open and transparent with you. Recognizing that my emphasis still is in environmental issues. My concern, I don't want to say that I have not a serious concern about what is happening in social and governance, but I'm trying to push the environmental issues, and in particular, in the environmental, we can talk about natural resources, we can talk about water, air, land, plastic issues. All of them is important for me. But in particular, I believe the most compelling global issue we are facing is climate change and carbon emissions. Yes, we have other global problems that we need to fix. In the short term, for instance, the pandemic, and it looks like we are getting away with the pandemic, fortunately, thank God, already. And we have others that there have been like by centuries or millennia, like hunger and misery. Yes, we need to fight and solve that. But climate change is the most global, if I can say that, because even it's what is called the tragedy of the commons problem, no? Whatever you do, the consequences you do are not only going to be for you. If you have bad behavior, you are emitting, polluting, being unresponsible, the consequences will be for the entire world. And at the same time, if you do the right thing, you have not a personal or individual rewards. So it requires global effort to fix that. It's a global problem that only admits global solution. That's my sense of urgency in which I'm working in the climate change problem. is my main concern.
Yes.
And of course, the environmental issues. I'm coming from a beautiful country with rainforests, woods, desert as well, the most beautiful beaches in the world. But I want to work on that. And it doesn't say that I'm not seriously concerned about the social problems of my country,
Yes.
the governance problems of my country that are huge in this moment, by the way. But I want to talk about this problem of climate change and say, hey, it is possible to fix the planet and at the same time to have economic growth, jobs, and poverty alleviation if we do the right thing now.
Yes. If we jump to the future, a sustainable transformation will lead to a global rise in demand for green infrastructure, which will transform finance, turn the natural resource markets upside down, and redefine the technology sector. So what are the possibilities or the options we have?
The option for what? For financial market?
Yes, for the whole transformation.
Well, actually, the options are skyrocketing, I would say, everywhere. Because the financial world, curiously, is understanding in a much better way than I was expecting this deep transformation, deep transition towards the new climate economy. Let me explain. What I have serious concerns about the speed of the governments. But in terms of the finance, there are hundreds, and I dare to say even thousands of companies thinking and acting with the new parameters. So these SDG principles, sustainability related with environmental, governance, and social, which, by the way, are associated with Sustainable Development Goals as well, as the SDGs. There are a lot of companies, let's say, well, hundreds of companies at least, working in that direction and establishing mechanisms to take the decisions considering that. We, in the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate, for instance, in our last report, we are strongly recommending that the companies, including the financial sector, need to include these environmental criteria. What is the impact of your activities in the planet, in the natural resources? What are the level of emissions you have? And actually, a lot of companies are mandated, but their stakeholders to establish clearly, white and black, the number of the emissions the emission they are emitting every single year, and the way the actions and the measures they are taking in order to reduce them. What about every single company needs to be transparent about the carbon footprint they have, and a lot of them are doing that. And let me tell you, in the financial sector, there's a very important sector which is doing that for natural reasons. So let me see, very explainable reasons. What about the insurance sector? Why? Because an insurance company, that industry needs to pay more money year after year paying for natural disasters.
That's right.
Let's see, what about a company has a lot of insurances now with the hurricanes in Miami? You can imagine that the Americans, rich people in that region, in Florida and those states, they have a lot of properties, highways, public works. All of them, I can assure you, are under some insurance contract.
Yes.
What is going to happen in 2 days or 3 days when those insurance companies needs to pay billions or trillions of dollars to repair those damages? So insurance sector is thinking, oh my God, if we don't fix climate change, all of us are going to go to bankruptcy. So financial sector, in particular insurance, is completely associated. But we're link insurance with banking system, with financial, they are all connected. And honestly, I need to say another thing. There are a lot of smart people, young people in the sector, in several sectors. And let me switch to the younger generation, like yours, that are understanding perfectly what is happening. Maybe my generation or older. Either we don't understand, or we don't want to admit what exactly is happening. We don't want to take the responsibility we must take. However, the younger generation are taking the decisions, are taking the place, are taking the responsibility. And my invitation is for the younger generations to take politics in their hands. In democracies, for instance, we need new people, fresh people, young people, taking the responsibility of leading the nations. And I would say for those young kids, hey, it's good that you are protesting and making rallies and blaming or finger pointing the politicians. No, I finger point back. You must be the politician. You must jump into the quite difficult task, and I would say the quite difficult advocacy mission to serve the others through politics. It's not easy. You are blamed about everything. You are never understood. You always will be guilty about that. There are a lot of people loving you and a lot of people hating you. But it's hard. It's much comfortable to be out of that and just criticize and criticize. It's time to take action. And if the politician don't want to understand or don't understand the problem, don't want to take the right decisions, just move the politicians through democratic ways, through responsibility. And say in democracies, the problem we have is the good citizens, and in particular the young people, maybe they don't want to get involved in politics. It's time to get involved. We want to take the responsibility, want to serve the others through this difficult way. But that's completely different from our conversation. But yes, I believe that younger generations are understanding the problems of the planet in a better way, and for the same reasons. When they take the responsibility, either in government, the new generations, for instance, of leaders, here in Sharjah, for instance, I can see the new generations of the crown prince, the ruler, the deputy ruler, etc. They're young people, they are completely understanding that. I can see in the Emirates an incredible action taken, and I bless that because it looks like clearly that the new younger generation are taking action in a very admirable direction. And I pray for that, and I call in my country to the new generations to remove the old guys that are just blocking the change we need. I love my country, in every single place, if you are called to serve the others, either in religion, leader, or in politics, or in the companies of your fathers or whatever, it is time to take the responsibility with the planet, and I hope that this one of the ways in which we can address the problem in a better way in the future.
Yes. Speaking of younger generations, since your childhood, you've been passionate about climate change, and you learned how to respect the planet influenced by your father. Do you think that the kids, the new generations today, are aware of the global issues and climate change?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that's my hope. We made a lot of mistakes. My generation and older, we made this disaster, this mess that we have today on the planet. But you can ask any kid, and I dare to say in the world, either in Africa, in a very poor country, or in America and in the United States, in a very rich neighborhood, all those kids understand much better than their parents sometimes that we need to fix the problem of the planet. And yes, I remember my father. I heard my father was an old man when I was born. When I was born, my father was 51 years old. And he was smart enough to get a special connection with me. And he always was making this joke that I was not his son, but his grandson. But I have an incredible connection with my father. And I remember him, he was very old already. In a political meeting in the party we belonged at that time, suddenly he started to talk about climate change. I'm talking about 73, something like that. I was so impressed. So my father started to say that the snow in the volcans in Mexico was going to disappear, at least in its permanent base. That there was already like acid rain in some parts of the world, that the pollution in the city was going to kill people. So a lot of people of his generation, and even younger than him, say, oh my God, Pildo was his nickname, he's becoming crazy. And my father was already sick, indeed. It was, some circulatory diseases. I said, well, maybe this disease is affecting his brain already. And they went with my mother with compassion, said, oh, I'm really sorry about your husband and so on. And I was absolutely sure my father was completely right. So, and yes, the snow in the Mexican volcans melted, and the Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. It has a sporadic snow, but it's not a permanent one. The acid rain happened. The pollution is killing 700,000 people in a premature way in the world. Almost 1 million people that we can avoid if we clean the air. So my father was right. He taught me how to plant a tree. My first tree was planted with him, I remember. And as president, we planted maybe 2,000 million trees in Mexico. Of course, not all of them survive, most of them die, but you need to this big effort. We started to pay the people to environmental services, so indigenous communities, that they need to lock down the trees in order to have money for survive. We started to pay them in order to preserve the trees in the wood, to preserve the trees in the rainforest. So yes, I'm passionate, because my father, because myself. And the only way in which we can have a legacy is about if you are able to live according with your own ideas and values. And I realized that after being president of Mexico, I'm unable to run again for president. The call I have from the Almighty or my personal advocacy is to do whatever I can do in order to get the message across, to try to fix the planet, to look for alternatives, and not utopian alternatives, but very pragmatical alternatives, economic alternatives, an alternative that provoke and creates jobs and economic growth and poverty alleviation, things like that. That's exactly what we are doing, or what we are doing in the Commission, the Global Commissions on the Economy and Climate.
Yes. I want to talk about the gaining the public support regarding the environmental and climate issues. Do we use today the right mechanisms to gain this support?
Well, definitely, probably not. And the evidence is that we are not getting enough support in public opinion. In the younger generation, as you were saying, definitely yes. And you can see the younger generations protesting a lot in order to take responsibility. But what is clear is we have not yet the support of public opinion in a massive way what is needed. Maybe one of the hypotheses is what I already mentioned. And we have learned, in a big mistake, that we need to choose between economic growth and tackling climate change. And I say, no, we can choose both. We don't know to decide one or the other. There is not such a trade-off. So we need to transmit the new message. And probably we need a new narrative, and the new narrative needs to be positive, because what I have learned from my whole life in politics is people could be moved by fears, but it's much better to move and mobilize the people by hope.
Yeah, and passion.
And the passion, yes. So in climate, maybe it's time to talk not as much as, not only, I don't say we should not talk about the tragedies of climate change, because those are there. We need to talk about the horror of climate change, the horror of the health of climate change, the level of the sea, the droughts, the hurricanes, all of that stuff, yes. But not only talk about horror, talk about the promise of the paradise. Talk about the jobs we can create, talk about the economic growth we can get, talk about the opportunities talk about the clean air, the free spaces, the clean rivers, the clean ocean we can have. That's kind of it's a land paradise. It's a paradise in the earth, and that we have responsibility to take care of that, the land we have received.
Yes.
So I believe we need to change the narrative for a more positive one, definitely.
I hope so. Thank you, Mr. President, for having you here.
No, thank you.
It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for the opportunity. Let me confess that it has been a long time without giving an interview. I accepted because I have an incredible gratitude for the hospitality of Sharjah. So thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity to develop my own ideas again after a while
Thank you,
of time.
Mr. President.
Thank you.
شكرا لكم مشاهدينا على متابعة هذه الحلقة. إلى اللقاء.